Hello, everyone, and thank you for watching this presentation. My name is Georgiana Mihut, and I work for an organization called the Economic and Social Research Institute, which is based in Ireland. In this presentation, I would like to introduce the results of a research study I conducted titled Bullying in Irish Schools, Testing the Effect of Question Wording on Prevalence Rates. Why research this topic? Students' self-perception on having experienced being bullied has been linked to higher dropout rates, lower academic performance, and adverse physical health. Yet measures of bullying have offered different estimates about its prevalence among children and adolescents. Some studies have reported bullying rates as high as 47% and some as low as 5%. At the same time, evidence on the effect of items or questions wording on participants' response has long been documented. For example, research on the prevalence of sexual harassment and assault have shown that if the measurement scales do not mention the word sexual assault or sexual harassment, reporting rates increase both for the victims and for perpetrators. However, research has not always found a statistically significant effect of wording differences. In a study evaluating the effect of changing the referent degree of disability as part of a 4-item scale, the authors, Diedrich and Marfo, have not found any effect on the scale's psychometric properties. So we shouldn't assume that all studies looking at the effect of wording in scales or items will find a statistically significant effect. With relevance to whether or not the word bully is being used on a scale, one previous study has shown statistically significant differences between reporting rates linked to different measurement scales. If the word bully is not used on measurement scales, reported incidence of victimization behavior was higher. This was a study with a relatively small sample size conducted in 2010. Now, let's talk a bit about the Irish context. The leading source of data on bullying in the Irish context is a longitudinal study, Growing Up in Ireland, or GUI. One GUI cohort has been followed since age 9 every 4 years. Relevant data is available until the age 13. Participants in the GUI have been asked both about having been victims of bullying and also about engaging in bullying behaviors themselves. In the current version of the GUI survey for age 13, the items that measure bullying filter responses and respondents using the following question: have you been bullied in the last 3 months? And respectively, in the last 3 months, have you bullied someone? The results of GUI suggest that 10% of 13-year-olds have experienced bullying and that 1.9% of children reported they bullied others. These are nationally representative figures given the nature of the GUI study. But these figures are also lower than those reported in previous waves of the research study with the same cohort. For example, at age 9, overall, 40% of 9-year-olds have experienced bullying, and 13% of children reported they had picked on somebody or have inflicted bullying on someone else. The variations in prevalence rates between the two waves has been explained by changes in the bullying measurement scales used by the two longitudinal waves of data collection. Again, pointing towards the relevance of actually measuring the impact of measurement scales on bullying reporting rates. Now in this paper, I aim to understand the effect of two alternative bullying measurement scales on reporting rates in the Irish context. As part of a survey with secondary school students at 9 schools in Ireland, with a survey population of 709 respondents, questions about incidents of bullying were randomly asked in 2 distinct ways. In one experimental condition, I replicated the questions about bullying as asked by the Growing Up in Ireland study at age 13. In the second experimental condition, I asked respondents if they experienced or have inflicted the operationalized components of bullying as defined by the verbal and physical abuse scale of the International Civic and Citizenship Education Study. On this slide, you may see the two scales used to test the prevalence of bullying. The Growing Up in Ireland version asked participants, have you been bullied in the last 3 months? If a respondent chose no as an answer, they are filtered out of all further questions about bullying or having experienced bullying. In the verbal and physical abuse scale, respondents are asked how often a list of 6 problematic behaviors has happened to them. The list includes aspects such as being called by an offensive name and being physically attacked. The slide includes the measurement scales for engaging in bullying behaviors. Similarly, the GUI scale does not ask any further questions about bullying from participants who indicated they did not engage in bullying in the last 3 months. The verbal and physical abuse scale asks if respondents have engaged in any of the 6 negative behaviors discussed on the previous slide, essentially mirroring the behavioring experience, the bullying experience of participants. Now, for the purpose of this study, I want to introduce some of the descriptive results before I make a conclusion about the statistically significant or not nature of the experiment. So as the GUI scale essentially is a yes or no question on bullying, it's easier to actually estimate the overall prevalence rate for bullying using the GUI scale. So among the respondents in the study, 10% or 36 respondents indicate they have been bullied in the last 3 months. With the verbal and physical abuse scale, things are a bit more complicated. And before I give an overall estimate of prevalence, I want to introduce more of the descriptive statistics around this. As seen on this slide, a larger fraction of respondents indicated they have experienced behaviors such as being called by an offensive name and being physically threatened. 36 individuals alone indicated they were physically attacked by another student. In order to create a more direct comparison between the two scales, the GUI scale and the verbal and physical abuse scale, I created a categorical variable using the verbal and physical abuse scale. And my conditions here were that if a respondent has indicated they have experienced any of the 6 behaviors in the scale 2 or more times, they have been deemed to have experienced bullying. So what you see on the slide is essentially all the red bars when students indicated they have experienced that behavior too, and the blue bars have been merged together to indicate absence of bullying on those behaviors, and the reverse, having experienced one of those behaviors 2 to 4 times or 5 times or more have been merged into a category indicating they have experienced those behaviors. And the results of using this method to create a categorical variable for having been bullied are presented in this slide. So using this method, 63% of respondents to the verbal and physical abuse scale have experienced at least one bullying behavior at least twice. And 36.7% of respondents have either experienced no bullying behavior or they have experienced it only once. The elimination of the single incidence of reporting has been aimed to correct some of the potential over-reporting of the scale. However, what you see on the slide is a strong variation between the GUI reporting rate and the verbal and physical abuse scale, with only 10% of GUI respondents indicating they have experienced bullying, and 63% of the respondents to verbal and physical abuse scale indicated they have experienced any of the operational component of one bullying scale. Now, for having inflicted bullying behaviors on others, the descriptives look very similar. So on the verbal and physical abuse scale, multiple students have admitted to having engaged in problematic behaviors. For example, 13 students have admitted to physically attacking another student, and 4 admitted to posting an offensive picture or text about another student on the internet. I've used a similar procedure to create a categorical version of the scale to estimate prevalence rate. And the slide indicates the gap between the GUI and the verbal and physical abuse scale. So 43% of students indicated they have inflicted at least one problematic behavior included in the verbal and physical abuse scale twice or more on another student. In comparison, only 1.4% or 5 respondents have admitted to bullying other students in the last 3 months. Of course, these are descriptive differences at this point, and the next step would be to establish if these differences are also statistically significant. And in order to do this, I conducted chi-square test analyses for both having experienced bullying and having inflicted bullying on others or having engaged in bullying behavior yourself. And the slide includes the results, which for both analyses are statistically significant. So the experimental condition for both scales have proven to be statistically significant, indicating that this is a very important difference in the outcomes reported by the two scales. Now, what does this mean? I believe there are 2 meaningful conclusions to this study. First, it is important to know that the 2 bullying measuring scales yielded both statistically and practically significant results. The reporting rates are very, very different between the 2 measurement scales for both having experienced and having engaged in bullying behaviors. I would strongly suggest that bullying measurement scales, including those used by Growing Up in Ireland and other studies like Growing Up in Ireland, should focus on measuring relevant, operationalized behaviors that are associated with bullying and avoiding the use of bullying as a label in any of the questions asked in order to mediate any sort of social desirability effect associated with using the word bullying. The second conclusion, maybe more important, is that bullying measurement scales need to be aligned with the detection of problematic behaviors so that better interventions can be designed. Reporting prevalence rate should not constitute the end goal of this line of research. Depending on your definition of bullying, depending on the population you are researching, you might get numbers that are very, very high. You might get estimates suggesting incredibly high prevalence rates of bullying or incredibly low prevalence rates of bullying. Neither in itself should be alarming or reassuring, and we should think about detecting behaviors that we want to avoid and designing interventions that may potentially limit these type of very problematic behaviors. So the goal of measurement scales for bullying should definitely be to evaluate the success or failure of interventions to address bullying behaviors. Thank you very much for your attention. If you have any questions or concerns about this study, you may email me at georgiana.mihuts@tsri.ie, and you may comment on the portal for this presentation. Thank you for your attention.